Hey everyone, it's Colin from Legalized Mischief Productions. Thank you for joining me and welcome. In this tutorial, I'm going to demonstrate how to paint rusty, worn, textured industrial bases, mostly using a sponge and some washes. So this one's cool. I'm excited for this one. It's very straightforward. You get a really cool effect at the end, and we're going to be painting this basically. These are for Aeronautica Imperialis. I just finished these up for an Aeronautica Imperialis commission I'm doing, and I love the basing so much that I'm doing a tutorial on them because I think it's cool. So what we need is some packing foam, pluck foam to do the sponging. Primed, these are GWs, Sector Imperialis or whatever I think it's Sector Imperialis bases, but like Necromunda, whatever they give you with Necromunda, I'm blanking on it right now. I didn't do my research for this segment, so these are just GW's plastic bases. These things are great. If I wanted to do an industrial based army, I would absolutely use these. So I've primed them black, and then with the airbrush I gave them an overall base coat of this Vallejo metal colored burnt iron. It's just a really dark steel metallic, very gray, very straightforward. We're going to be basically batch painting all 5 of these because we want time for our washes to dry. I'll probably still have to get out the heat gun to move things along, but I at least wanted to get a few of these knocked out and show how straightforward this is really. I mean, this is really straightforward. So we're going to take Vallejo metal color exhaust manifold, and these don't have to be these colors. These can be, whatever dark, medium, and light metallics you have lying around. I mean, these are not, personally, I really like these colors, but they absolutely do not even have to be these colors. You could even just prime these things black and then spray them with lead belcher and go from there. So this is not necessarily paint specific until we get to the washes. So we're taking the sponge, and what I mean by sponging, make sure we have some paint on there. There we go. So we're going to take the sponge, this foam, and now this exhaust manifold is not that different from burnt iron, but you can see that we're just building up a little texture. And that's what this basing scheme is all about, building up texture. So we just want to get a nice, you don't have to cover the whole base. You don't want to cover the whole base. We're going for a natural rusty effect in a natural environment. We're trying to replicate something from nature, which is the rusting of metal. So the more variation and the more randomness, the more natural it's going to look. Uniformity is not really a thing when it comes to rusting metal. It just isn't. So this is, we could go crazy and use pigments and do all this stuff, but this is a really good way to get really striking rust-looking bases without having to get into all kinds of different enamels or oils or pigments or all kinds of crazy, more advanced materials, which is why I wanted to do this tutorial. So I'm going to show you how to do this with, mostly sponging and just acrylic paints and washes. So we get some more. We'll get a new chunk of sponge. I don't really like that chunk. And when you're tearing off the sponge, you want to use the part that you tore off. You want to use that part that you tore off. You don't want to use a flat part because you're not going to get a lot of variation. And then this is Vallejo Metal Color Pale Burnt Metal, and which is just a step up from Exhaust Manifold. And this you're going to notice the difference. So this you can see we're starting to build up that texture on the base. And the next part is the really fun part. So we're starting to build up that texture on the base with that pale burnt metal. So spongy, spongy, spongy. Now we're not going to get down in between these girders and stuff to get to those pipes. That's okay. The overall effect is still going to be there. So spongy, spongy, spongy. Dab, 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 dab. And we're not too fussed with the exact placement of this sponging because we're just building up a base texture to go under the wash. This is not going to be influenced. This isn't going to be visible really, other than being an underlying texture. Like you couldn't just wash over the flat metal and get the same effect. But we're not looking at the final product. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say. So now is the important part. Now is the fun part. So we have Vallejo Model Wash, dark rust and light rust. They also make a medium rust, but you know, it's basically right in between these two. But you know, if you're using both of these at the same time, you're going to end up with medium rust because they're going to mix. So Army Painter Strong Tone and any kind of artist ink. This is burnt umber. You know, can be whoever, whatever company, or can just be, you know, an umber, a sepia, really dark sepia wash or something like that would be fine too. That just dries really matte. So I like that. I like that one. So we have a little dark rust, a light rust, and we're going to take our very precise brush here, this mangled heap of bristles that we have. And this is where we want to start paying attention. And we want to start getting kind of that random element into this paint scheme. So take the dark rust, a little bit of dark rust, a little bit over here. Then we're going to dip into the light rust. And we don't want to just mix these together. We want to stay on the fringes. They'll mix together naturally when they wick and when they flow into each other, but we don't want to force the issue and just end up with a bunch of medium rust all over these bases. So you can see there's mix, there's a little pooling going on, we've got a little bit of everything going on there, but you can see the underlying texture under these washes. These washes are pretty transparent. So that's why we did the texture, even though, you know, you can see it, but you're like, okay, yeah. But then when you start putting these washes on, it starts to really, that underlying texture really starts to show up. So it's all about laying the groundwork for future steps. This is so fun. This is like the fun part of miniature painting here, is just kind of sloshing stuff around. A little bit of more dark rust there, a little bit more there. Get a little more variation. That looks good. You know, dark, dark. Maybe up here. And then get in the light. You can see how much lighter that light rust is than the dark rust. So we want to stop. We don't, because if we just start mixing it and we get one kind of note, one tone of rust across the base, it's not going to look as natural. It's not going to be as interesting. So we want a little pooling is not bad. A lot of pooling is not ideal. So you just want to keep an eye on it. So dark, dark. You can always go back and just wipe off the brush if you feel like it's pooling too much, like right there in the middle. If you think that's a little excessive, just wipe off the brush and just tap it, and the bristles will pull a lot of that paint right out of it. So really, the most you can use any metallic paints for this. It doesn't have to be metal color. I just really like metal color, and I have them already. But if you're going to be doing, if you're like, oh man, I want to base mine, like these are perfect for Necromunda. Like if I played Necromunda, which I wish I had time to play, I would do this for my basing, for my gangs. But if you're like, oh, I want to do my, Imperial Fist army on this, or I want to do my, Necromunda gang on this style of base, just go buy the Vallejo washes, and because they're really good, they're transparent, they're a good price point. I think they're like $6, and this pot is twice the size of a dropper bottle and will last you forever. So there's really good value, and they're just a fantastic product. So highly recommend those. So in the interest of this tutorial, I'm going to get my heat gun out. You probably want to do a ton of these bases at once if you're doing, you let it dry. I don't want you to sit around and wait for stuff to dry. So I'm going to use my heat gun. You could probably use a hair dryer rather than a heat gun, because the heat gun's a little testy. It'll just absolutely melt these things. So this thing heats up real quick. Yeah, those bases are toasty. You can absolutely just melt a plastic model with that thing. I use it to bend forge rolled resin and then dry stuff in tutorials, because you can see now it's the rust is pretty subtle, but you can see that underlying texture and stuff. Super cool. Super cool. Same thing. So we're well on our way now to having a nice looking base, but we're going to take it a step further and get a little bit of that Army Painter Strong Tone and a little bit of that Artist Ink, that burnt umber. And we're going to get in there and just randomly kind of mush that around in there. And you can see the rust wash is still a little, we're going to get some of that umber. Woo, that was a little heavy. Get some of that umber. And get even just more variation, which is what we're going for here. So now you can see those browns. That Army Painter is brown, but it's a really kind of black brown, neutral brown type of color. It's a very specific color. Then get a little bit of that burnt umber. And that burnt umber you want to be very kind of sparing with, because it is so strong that you can really start to overwhelm the base if you start to go crazy with the burnt umber. And then we'll go back to the dark tone, kind of mash it around in there. Now this, like all that rust kind of settled around this skull here, so we want to make sure to pay a little extra attention to that area to break that up, because it was all just kind of filled in with that rust wash, and we want to avoid that. So, and we also want to be careful while we're doing this that we're not just hitting a spot like that and leaving like a round mark on the base. We always want to be tapping and kind of pushing texture, pushing contrast, so pushing texture, I mean. Because remember, the more random this is, the more natural it's going to look. I don't like that. So now we're starting to really get a grimy look here. And I don't use Army Painter paints hardly ever. I just don't have a lot of experience with them. But I use their washes often. They're really good. If you haven't tried them, you should try them. So there, we're going a little bit heavier on this base just to give a little variation. Just mix it up a little bit. And we return to hot. Oh no. What happened? I think I heated up the acrylic underneath my paper here. So there we have a nice finish on a nice variation. You can see there. I'm trying to figure out an angle. There we go. That's better. You see a nice variation in color, a nice variation in texture. The wash in those recesses is still wet, and that's going to take a minute to dry because it's really pooling in there, but that's okay. It just means it's going to take us a while to varnish it, but that's fine. We're not in a huge hurry. But you can see that looks really nice. That is a really nice mix of metal and rust and grime and grease, and super happy with that. This one is a little too uniform for me. I don't like this down here. I'm not wild about this up here either. So when we do the next step, we're just going to keep that in mind and kind of concentrate in those areas just a little bit. So now we're going to go back with the exhaust manifold, get our sponge. We're going to go back with that exhaust manifold and very lightly. This is where we really want to be judicious with this, because if we go a little overboard, I've been overly cautious there, but that's fine because we can always go back. If we go overboard with this step, we're going to obliterate all that progress that we made, all those layers that we built up. But this is the money step. This step is the one that brings everything together and gives it a nice look. So just a little sponge. This is not going to be super noticeable, again, because the exhaust manifold, the medium steel metallic, whatever you end up using, again, it's not that much different than the underlying layer. that final layer that we put the washes on, this exhaust manifold isn't that different, but you can see it's starting to kind of break up that texture a little bit. And then the next rounds of sponging are where we're really going to see this whole thing come together. So just very lightly, randomly, building up that texture. Because even if something's, rusty and old and worn, there's still going to be areas where people are walking, where people are fighting, dropping things. So those are going to have scratches, scuffs, scrapes, worn areas, and all of those considerations are going to contribute to it looking more believable as a rusty, old place, but a place where people are, not just an abandoned. So now this is the pale burnt metal, and this we really want to be more careful with, because you can see this is going to show up more than the exhaust manifold did. This is much lighter. So we really want to be judicious. But you can see that's starting to develop a really nice tech. That looks great. I'm super happy with that. And really, we used, one mangled brush for the washes and sponges to get what could be a very cool basing scheme for, a gang or an army. I'd be happy to throw an army on this basing scheme. I think it'd be cool. That's pretty cool. Digging that. A little bit more of that exhaust manifold. Do like a manufactorum in Sector Mechanicus or something? I don't know. Terrain? I mean, this is like, if you're doing terrain, walkways on terrain and stuff, this would be great. So now I'm going in with chrome, with like a white metal. This would be like mithril silver or something. I know it hasn't been called mithril silver probably in 15 years, but this is a very white silver. And this is like little baby taps with this, because this is going to be the last little finishing touch on that textured steel. There, look at that. That is awesome. I love this hobby. This is so cool. I like world building, You can almost smell this place. Look at that. Look at that texture. Oh, that's so cool. I'm so happy with my job. I hope you guys think this is as cool as I do. And again, this is like, we're really being careful with this silver, because if you like really whack one of these bases with the silver, it's going to throw the whole thing out of whack. But if you're just gently, very gently, just a little tap, just a little bit, to just get the edges here and there, you end up with, a pretty cool effect. And that's it. We're done. I'm not going to get a chance to varnish these on film because down in these recesses on these particular bases, the look at that, man, that's cool. Down in the recesses in these particular bases, that wash is still wet, so that probably won't dry for another hour or so. But lucky for me, I have this base. I did a satin varnish on the base to give it kind of an overall metallic kind of sheen, and because this is a gaming base and it needs the durability, but I gave it a satin varnish, which gives it a really nice look. You could matte varnish it as well, of course, but overall, I think we nailed it. So that is my rusty, grungy, underhive base sponging tutorial. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you think it's as cool as I do, because I think it's rad. So that's just a one-off base tutorial. I will be getting back to the bases that we built in the simple base construction video. I have to finish prepping those, but stay tuned because there are going to be more basing videos. I love basing. I think it's super fun. So I'm going to be sprinkling those in as well. So as always, thank you for your support, and looking forward to the next time. See you soon.